Hey guys, it's Bella, and in this video we are going to be reading through and translating chapter 6, or rather leaf 6 of the Skeireins. So as usual with these videos, if you want to have a go at translating it on your own, please feel free to pause the video, write out your translation, and then you can check what you wrote against what I talk about in the video, and what I talk about may not necessarily be correct, but it'll probably be correct. I hope. I just don't want to sound too arrogant and be like, my translation is the right one, because even academics disagree on how to translate the Skeireins. So, anyway, let's get on with it. And as usual with many of our leaves, the first word is unfortunately cut off, so I'm going to ignore it. Uns wicanthos I warth bí nothe jenis insachts, so silba is quithith. Jens skal wachsion if ik minsnan. In thisi nu du litile huile galobian Johanne hosiandans tuchtidun. If affarni fillu uffarmodhin phobi ina atgevun. Ethan wela in smodith quithans. So, what does this mean? Unswickenthorsi warth insachts. Let's do that first. So, the orsi here is a sort of feminine form of the comparative, which means great something right? And unswickunths is a sort of goodness unpure. So this word is kind of hard to explain to, but it means unpurer. So like basically less pure. It became less pure. Ward became insachts. This is the argument. Because sakan can sort of mean to attack, and we can see that with a lot of words in the Skeireins, this concept of sakan or sachts, to sort of argue or to prove by argumentation as a form of almost like battle, combat, is there quite a bit. So it's an important concept. So the argument became less pure, be nothe, according to the necessity, yenis, of that man. Swe silba is quithith, just as he himself, silba is quithith. He says, Jens skal wachsen if ik minsnan, that man shall grow, meanwhile I shall diminish. In thisi nu du litile huile galobian Johanne hosiondans thuchtedun. So, now, what this means, we'll tackle the nominative first. So, hosiondans is the men believing, and then the verb here is plural, so thuchtedun is they thought. So the men listening thought Galobian, to believe, Johanne, because Galobian takes the dative as its object. So the men listening thought to believe John. In Thesi, no, on account of this now. Du little huile, for a little while. So what it's saying is that when John the Baptist says Yen Skalwachsian ithik minsnan, the men who are listening thought that they should believe it at least for a little bit. If affarni fillu uffarmodhin thopi inna atgebun is meanwhile, or maybe even until, ni fillu uffarmodhin, not a great reminder, basically. For those things, be inna, according to him, and that's Jesus, I believe. Atgebun is they granted, or they conceded to, I think, is maybe a good way of thinking about it. Ethan wela ins modith quithans, whenceforth, well, he reminds them, saying, and then he's gonna have a quote from John the Baptist in the next line. But from start to finish, this means the argument of that man became less pure out of necessity, as he himself says, that man shall grow, meanwhile I shall diminish. On account of which now those men listening thought to believe John for a little while. Meanwhile, after not much reminding, they granted those things about him. Wherefore, he advises them well, saying, and then we go on to see what John the Baptist is saying. Jens was lukkarn brennando ja liuhtjando. If jus wildid swigenjandu huile in liuhada is. Athan ik hava witwodi mesin thama Johanne, tho ok wordstua thoi atkaf mis atta. I ik toyo tho wordstua thoi ik toya. Witwodiand bimek, fati atta mik insandida. So, what does this mean? Jens was lukkarbrennando jachliuktjando. Let's tackle this clause first. So in this clause, we actually only have one verb, was, and then we have a bunch of nominatives. And what that means is that these nominatives are being equated to each other and they are the same thing. Now, we have two different objects that are being referred to here, or two different subjects, I should say, that are being referred to here. We have the Jens, which is that man, and we have Lukan brennando jachliuktjando. And we know that they are two different things because Lukan brennando liuktjando, these are all neuter singular nominatives, right? And Jens is masculine singular nominative. So that's how we can tell that there are two different things, because Lukarn cannot be referred, sorry, the Jens cannot be referring to Lukarn or Brennando, etc. So what it means is that man was a lantern burning and lightening or shining. So relatively easy, and the syntax is very similar to English. If jus wildeduth swigenjan, du huile in liohava is. Meanwhile, you all wildeduth you wanted, swigenjan to exult or to triumph, du huile for a while, in liohava is, in his light. And notice here that Gothic is usually a pro-drop language, which means it drops pronouns because the endings of verbs tell you the person who is doing the action, but the fact that they've got the pronoun in here, the jus pronoun, means that it is in there for emphasis. So it's you all wished to triumph for a while. And then they contrast it with another pronoun down here, athan ik hava, but I have witwaditha mesin, a greater witnessing or a greater testimony, thama Johanne, than John. So in Gothic, there are two ways of doing comparisons. One of which is to have a adjective with in a nominative with a dative, right? So meza im thus means I am greater than you. Meza being nominative and thus being dative. And the other one, and that's normally used to compare qualities of nouns, of adjectives. To compare the quality of actions, you use the word tho, thorn, a and u. So, tharatoya batizo tho thu means I do that better than you do. And the fact that we have the latter here, sorry, the former here, we have a noun with an adjective, mesin, and we have a dative here. This suggests that it is not that John is testifying better, or that John himself, I guess, has a greater testimony. It's that John the Baptist himself is the testimony, which is kind of an interesting grammatical construction that the Skeireins is engaged in here. So this, what I'm saying is that this clause is saying that John the Baptist himself is testimony. He's like a living testimony. Tho ok wordstva thoi argaf mis atta. So maybe this is also, well, this is actually the things that Jesus has. Tho ok wordstva is indeed those works or those achievements. Thoi, those which atta, the Father, argaf, gave, mis to me. So, however, I have greater testimony than John, I have these deeds or these accomplishments which the Father gave to me. I ik toiotho, so that I would do them. And notice when we have the e particle on its own here, not as a suffix on the end of a word, like thoi, when you have the e suffix on its own, it indicates purpose and intention. So this means so that I may do those things, because doyo is a subjunctive verb. For warstva, they specify, I may do those things, those accomplishments, thoi ik doya, which I do. Widwarian be mik, they testify about me. Fadi atamik insan vila. They testify about me that the Father sent me in, basically. So, from start to finish, this means that man was a lantern burning and shining. Meanwhile, you all wished to triumph for a while in the light of him. However, I have a greater testimony than John. Indeed, those deeds which the Father gave to me, so that I may do them, those deeds which I do, they testify about me that the Father sent me in. Hopefully that's not too difficult to follow along with. So, onto this one. Jens och skemwardam witwadians twiflian thuchta, sunjens wisans, fem unkunanda machta, if attins verch mina wardstva witwadi alla, och verinsagt maniskothos Johannes, unansok isvis unredan mag kunthi. So, let's go from Jens up to Thuchta here. So Jens ok Witwadians is indeed that man who is testifying, Witwadians being the nominative masculine singular present participle. Thuchta Twiflian, that man thought to doubt maniskem wardam, the human words, Sunjins wisans, being Sunnians is kind of difficult to translate, but it means of truth. So being truthful, let's say. Fem unkunanda machta. Now, these three words on their own don't actually make sense, so we have to borrow the infinitive from the previous clause, or the first clause here, which is twiflian, and then it makes sense. So he could doubt fem unkunandam, those goodness, he could doubt those men who were not knowing, basically. If atins derch minna wardstoa, meanwhile, of the Father, through my deeds of the Father, basically is what Jesus is saying, because those of you who watched the last video might remember that Jesus is pointing out how the things that he has are, or he's heard from heaven, are things from the Father, and likewise in the last verse he said that the tasks that Jesus is doing are the ones that God the Father gave to him. So they are through my deeds of the Father, Witwari Allah, all testimony, Ufar Insacht, beyond argumentation. So this is sort of saying that Jesus' testimony supersedes all of these arguments that the Jews were having about the old law and purification that we saw in the previous leaves of the Skeireins. Jonas Maniskodos Johannes. So Maniskodos, I'm sort of translating as narrative, basically, the sort of perspective of man, basically. And then Johannes is obviously of John. Unansok kunthi. This is sort of, so un obviously is un, and then ansok is sort of means argued. So this is unargued kunthi, knowledge. Isvis unredan mag. I might bestow to you all, or it might, I should say, bestow to you all, because the nominative in this sentence is the witwadi Allah. So I'll go from start to finish and show you guys, hopefully, what this means. So, indeed, that man testifying thought to doubt in human words, being truthful, but he was able to doubt those men not knowing. Meanwhile, all testimony may bestow unargued knowledge to you all through my deeds of the Father beyond the argumentation of John's narrative. So you can see with my mouse, there's a lot of jumping around. The syntax is all over the place here with this bit of the Skeireins, but that's why it's fun. So on to this next one. Unte huariato huarde at mannam innuman macht ist antarlikin in median. If tho vichona vorstva unanda sakana visandona unsvekkunthiandona this vorkandins dom verchtaba banviandona thati from atin insandit swas us himena. So what this first clause is kind of difficult at unte to in median, but we'll get through it. So unte is because. Huariatoch huarde innuman. So huariatoch is and innuman are neuter, nominative, singular, and they mean everything which was taken up, and they are neuter because they are part of a construction with a genitive warde, which is of the words, so they have to have the same gender because it's like each one of the words, right? So each of the individual ones has to itself be a word, and therefore it has to have the same grammatical gender as the word warde, and that gender happens to be neuter. So since each one taken up of the words at manam, among the men, or rather it was taken up in numanist. So each of the words was taken up by men in median macht to usurp or to adulterate power antarlikin, with otherness, essentially. If for wichona wordstva, namely those holy deeds, and I believe that these are the words that are being referred to here. Un ansakana wisandona, those words which were being unargued. Gaswikunthiandona, these wordkandans, the ones making known, domathis wordkandins, the judgment of this man who is working them. So these words, the words that Christ is preaching, is what this is saying, are themselves acts, they are deeds. So the Skeireins here is bringing in almost sort of modern performativist theory, saying that the words of Christ are themselves speech acts, and these wichona words by themselves, because for wichona words were unsakanana wisandona, and then gaswikunthiandona. These are all neuter, nominative, plural forms of the nouns and adjectives and participles respectively. So they are all the same thing. And therefore, the holy word, the holy works are the ones which are, I guess, making known. So these works, which are themselves the deeds, they are the words. The works of Christ, which are the words of Christ, are working his workandins, his judgment. Or rather, Jesus Christ is working them, and they are making his judgment known. So these words are working. In other words, these are working words, and working is done through words. I don't know. It's weird to explain, but we essentially have this text is dealing with the fact that Jesus's words are themselves speech acts, in a sense comparable to what in present day critical theory we would understand as a speech act in the sort of performativist understanding of discourse. So what this is saying is those deeds were making the judgment of this man who is working them known, basically. Berchtaba banwiandona, brightly they were demonstrating thati from atin insanditswas, that from the Father he was sent, was himena, from heaven. So, from start to finish, it's actually kind of difficult to translate this stuff because I think you might need to, one might need to put in an implied wisan here, but I'll go here from start to finish. So, since each of the words among men was taken up to adulterate power through otherness, meanwhile, those holy deeds, being unargued, were were demonstrating the judgment of this man who was working them, brightly demonstrating that he was sent in from heaven by the Father. So you can see again my cursor jumping around the screen. Very difficult syntax, as usual with the Gothic Skeireins. On to this nice short little bit. Inoch this gwydith yach sai sandinamic atta sach witwadith bimik, which means, and on account of this, Jesus speaks, yach sai sandinamic, also that man who sent me, Atta, the Father, sach witwadith bimik, that man also testifies about me. So, not too difficult there. On to this one. Athan missalix, yach in missalike meilam attins bi inna warth witwadins. Summan ferch profete warda. Summanuch van ferch stivna is us himna. Summanuch van ferch teknins. So, what does this mean? So, however, misalix is various, basically, or diverse. Yach in misalikem melam, and in diverse. Now, melam, when it's in the plural, it means writings, but when it's in the singular, it usually means points in time. So this is presumably referring to sacred scripture. In various writings, attins of the Father, bi'ina about him, warth witwadins. Now, I think that what this is actually not a noun, witwadins. I think this is an adjective. So he became testifying or testified, basically. So what this is saying is that Jesus, over time with his message, he was testified to by various witnesses in various writings of concerning God the Father. Summan ferch profete warda, sometimes through the words of the prophets. Sumanoch van ferch stivna us himina, sometimes then through a voice coming from heaven. Sumanoch van ferch teknins, and sometimes then through signs or through miracles. So from start to finish, this would be, however, he became testified variously and in various writings about him from the Father. Sometimes through the words of the prophets, and sometimes then through the voice from heaven, and sometimes then through signs. So what this is saying is that Jesus Christ is attested in various different forms. And has different witnesses. That's all that means. So, if in thesi them swa warthana me hardis o thesi unga loviandanne warth herto. Inuch this garechta va aneok quithans. Nich stivna is huanuch gahosideduth, nich sion is gasehuth, ward is ni haveth, wisando in isvis, thande thani insandida jens, thamboch jus nigalovith. So what this means is, meanwhile, on account of this, if in thesi, them swawarthanam, to those men have this is a kind of difficult to translate word, but it means to those men who had turned out in that way. Swawarthanam. Hardizo wartherto. The heart became harder. Hardizo. Thesi ungaloviandane, of these unbelieving men, basically. Inuch this, garechtava anok quitans. And on account of this, he righteously added some more words, saying, Nechstivnais Juan hun gahosideirus. You all neither heard his voice, hear his voice. Nich sion is gasechuth, nor did you see his face or his appearance. Yach word is ni haveth, wisandoin isvis. And you all do not have the word of him residing or being in you guys. Thande thani in sandiva yens. As long as that man sent him him, in which thamoch yus nigalovith, in whom you do not believe. And so maybe a better way of translating Thande is nevertheless. And then the yens, of course, would be referring to God the Father in heaven. So from start to finish, this would mean, meanwhile, the heart of these unbelieving men grew harder on account of those, or for those, with those things having come to pass as they did. And on account of this, he added, saying, truly, you all neither heard his voice, nor did you perceive his sight, and you do not have the word of him residing in you guys. Nonetheless, that man sent him whom you guys do not believe in. So that's what that passage in the Skeireins means. Unte at them gahwervam frakunan ni skuld ist. Ith sumeach stivna is gahosideidun, sume than is sion sehun. Andage, odage, ok thanquath the renia hertans unte feguth gasechand. So what this means is, unte ni skuld ist means since it is not necessary frakunan to reject at them gahwervam, with those agreeable ones, basically. Essentially, you don't need to reject favorable things. Ith sumeach stivna is gahosideirun. Meanwhile, some men also heard his voice. Sumethan is sion sehun. Then some saw his face. Odage ok thanquath. Happy, he then said, fe renia hertans are the pure of heart, unte fe guth gasechwand, because they will see God. So from start to finish, this means because it is not necessary to condemn with such agreeable things, since some also heard his voice, then some saw his sight. Indeed, then he says, happy are those men who are pure of heart, since they will see God. Nice and easy. And then the last bit is Yahu Thothos we Wadi Ferch. And now thence, like a deposit, basically, through, and then the rest of it cuts out, and we don't have the rest of this leaf. Okay, so that was the Skeireins leaf number 6. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want me to teach you Gothic or any of the other languages that we do here on this channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon, which will be linked in the description of this video. You can also join my Discord server where we regularly do language learning stuff, and it's just a fun community of like-minded people. We're decently active at the time of this video, so you can come and join us, make some friends, have a chat. It's all good, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye everyone!